What happens when Hollywood's most carefully crafted image of warmth and elegance collides with a daytime talk show legend who's never been afraid to speak her mind? What happens when the smiles freeze, the applause fades, and a studio audience realizes they're watching a moment that was never supposed to go this far? The lights inside the View studio were bright, almost blinding, as Margot Robbie walked out to her chair, waving with that familiar, polished grace. She looked relaxed, confident, the kind of calm that comes from knowing you've survived blockbuster premieres, red carpets, and relentless media cycles. The audience cheered louder than usual, some standing, some whispering her name as if she were royalty stepping into a throne room rather than a talk show set. Before another word is spoken, make sure you subscribe to Stage View, hit like, and drop a comment right now, because what unfolds next is the kind of moment people will argue about for years. Margot sat, crossed her legs, and smiled toward Whoopi Goldberg, who sat back in her chair, arms folded loosely, eyes sharp, unreadable. The introductions were smooth at first. Laughter floated across the room. Margot joked about filming schedules, about the surreal nature of fame, about how she still sometimes felt like the same girl from Australia who never imagined this life. The audience nodded along, comforted by the familiar rhythm of celebrity charm. But Whoopi didn't smile the way she usually did. She leaned forward slightly, hands clasped, as if she were waiting for the music to stop. It began subtly, almost invisibly. A question about representation, about Hollywood narratives, about responsibility. Whoopi's voice was calm, seasoned, carrying the weight of decades in front of cameras. "You've become a symbol to a lot of people," she said, eyes locked on Margot. "Do you ever worry that the roles you choose send the wrong message?" The air shifted. Margot's smile tightened, not disappearing, but changing shape. She took a breath, answering carefully, talking about artistic freedom, about trusting audiences to think for themselves. The audience murmured approval. For a moment, it seemed like the conversation would glide safely past the edge. But Whoopi didn't let go. She tilted her head, her tone firmer now. "Art doesn't exist in a vacuum," she said. "People listen. People follow. And sometimes silence speaks louder than any script." The word silence landed like a dropped glass. Margot's posture straightened. Her hands, once relaxed, clasped together. "I don't think it's fair," she replied, her accent sharpening slightly, "to expect actors to be moral compasses for the world." The audience reacted instantly, half applause, half uneasy shifting. The tension wasn't explosive yet, but it was alive, crawling through the studio. Cameras zoomed in, catching micro-expressions, the flicker of irritation in Margot's eyes, the unwavering intensity in Whoopi's gaze. Whoopi leaned back, but her voice didn't soften. "No one's asking you to be a compass," she said. "But when you profit from an image, you don't get to pretend it doesn't affect people." Margot paused. In that pause, the room held its breath. You could almost hear the whir of cameras, the rustle of cue cards. She spoke slowly, deliberately. "I choose roles that challenge me. That's my responsibility, to my craft. And what about your responsibility to your audience?" Whoopi shot back, quicker this time. Gasps rippled through the crowd. This wasn't the playful back-and-forth viewers expected. This was something raw, unscripted, two powerful women refusing to yield. Margot's jaw tightened. "I trust my audience to be intelligent," she said, a flash of steel in her tone. The applause was louder now, but fractured. Some clapped enthusiastically. Others remained silent, arms crossed, eyes darting between the hosts and the guest. The tension thickened, almost visible, as if the studio itself were leaning in. Margot tried to steer the conversation back, mentioning upcoming projects, her love for storytelling. But the moment had passed. Whoopi wasn't finished. "Hollywood has a habit," she said, voice low, deliberate, "of celebrating itself while ignoring who gets left behind." Margot looked directly at her. "And Hollywood also has a habit of simplifying complex people into talking points," she replied. The room erupted, applause, murmurs, a few scattered boos. This was no longer an interview. It was a confrontation, unfolding live, unfiltered. The producers off camera were likely panicking, but no one dared cut away. Margot inhaled, her inner thoughts racing. She'd handled hostile press before, but this felt different. This wasn't a reporter chasing a headline. This was a cultural reckoning, embodied in a single, relentless questioner. She could feel the audience's eyes on her, weighing every word. Whoopi's expression softened just a fraction, but her voice remained steady. "I'm not attacking you," she said. "I'm asking you to see the weight you carry." Margot nodded once, slowly. And I'm saying that weight shouldn't crush creativity, she replied. The silence that followed was deafening. For a moment, no one spoke. Then applause broke out again, louder, almost desperate, as if the audience needed to release the pressure building inside them. As the segment moved forward, the energy never quite returned to normal. Even lighter questions carried an undercurrent of unease. Margot laughed, but it sounded practiced now. Whoopi smiled, but her eyes remained serious. When the cameras finally cut to commercial, the studio buzzed with whispered conversations, stunned faces, and the sense that something irreversible had just happened. When the show returned, the tension hadn't dissipated, it had matured. Margot spoke more thoughtfully, choosing words with surgical precision. Whoopi listened, occasionally nodding, occasionally pressing again. The exchange became less explosive but more emotionally charged, like two tectonic plates grinding beneath the surface. Margot shared a story about early rejection, about being underestimated, about fighting to be taken seriously. Her voice wavered just slightly, enough for the audience to lean in. Whoopi responded not with confrontation, but with a quiet acknowledgement. That fight, she said softly, is why people look to you. Something shifted then. Not resolution, but recognition. Margot's eyes glistened, just for a second. I never wanted to be a symbol, she admitted. None of us do, Whoopi replied. The audience applauded, this time in unison, the sound warmer, fuller. Yet even in that moment of apparent understanding, the earlier clash lingered, unresolved, echoing in the corners of the studio. By the time the final applause faded and Margot stood to leave, the audience knew they'd witnessed something rare. Not a scandal, not a viral joke, but a genuine collision of perspectives. Margot hugged the hosts politely, thanked them, and walked off stage with her head high, though her thoughts were clearly elsewhere. Within minutes, social media ignited. Clips spread like wildfire. Headlines screamed about the tense exchange, the uncomfortable moment, the debate no one saw coming. Fans took sides, dissecting every glance, every pause. Some praised Whoopi for holding a star accountable. Others defended Margot's right to artistic freedom. The View's audience reaction became a story of its own. Some saying they felt empowered, others saying they felt blindsided. Industry insiders weighed in. Commentators argued late into the night. And Margot, somewhere far from the studio lights, reportedly replayed the conversation in her mind, wondering if she'd said too much or not enough. The aftermath wasn't loud for her. It was quiet. Interviews where questions lingered a little longer. Scripts read with a heavier sense of consequence. A deeper awareness that every choice, every role, would now be filtered through the lens of that moment on daytime television. For Whoopi, it was another chapter in a long career of speaking plainly, of refusing to soften hard truths. She didn't issue clarifications. She didn't walk anything back. She simply showed up the next day, as she always did, unapologetic. And for the audience, both in the studio and watching at home, it became a moment they wouldn't forget. A reminder that even polished interviews can fracture, that even smiles can crack, and that sometimes the most powerful television happens when no one is pretending anymore. Now it's your turn. Did Margot Robbie handle the confrontation with grace, or did Whoopi Goldberg expose a deeper truth Hollywood avoids? Share your opinion in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to Stage View for more explosive, emotional, and unforgettable celebrity stories. When the cameras faded back in after the commercial break, the applause sounded different, polite, cautious, like an audience unsure whether clapping was appropriate or dangerous. Margot Robbie settled back into her chair, smoothing the fabric of her dress, her face composed but her eyes alert. She was no longer the carefree guest. She was a woman measuring every breath, aware that millions were watching not just what she said, but what she meant. Whoopi Goldberg didn't rush. She let the silence breathe, let the weight of the earlier exchange settle into the room. That silence was her tool. It made people uncomfortable. It made people listen. Finally, she spoke, her voice lower now, almost conversational. She said, people think moments like this are about winning an argument. They're not. Margot nodded, but said nothing. Her fingers interlaced, then tightened. Inside, her thoughts raced. Don't sound defensive. Don't sound rehearsed. Be honest, but not exposed. Whoopi continued, they're about honesty. And honesty gets messy. The audience murmured in agreement, some nodding, others exchanging looks. Margot inhaled slowly. Honesty is messy, she said. Especially when everyone expects you to represent something bigger than yourself. A co-host leaned forward, sensing the tension still humming. "Do you feel trapped by that expectation?" she asked. Margot hesitated, just long enough for the cameras to catch it. "Sometimes," she admitted. "There's this assumption that if you don't speak on everything, you're avoiding responsibility. But if you speak, you're saying the wrong thing." Whoopi's eyes narrowed slightly, not in anger, but in focus. "That's the job," she said. "Not the acting. The visibility." A ripple passed through the crowd. Margot felt it like a wave hitting her chest. "I didn't sign up to be a spokesperson," she replied, her voice steady but edged. "I signed up to tell stories. And stories shape people." Whoopi shot back. The tension spiked again, sharper this time. Margot shifted in her seat. "So does interpretation," she said. "You can't control how people see you." Whoopi leaned forward, elbows on the table. "No," she said. "But you can't pretend you don't see them either." A gasp escaped somewhere in the audience. Someone clapped once, then stopped. The studio felt smaller, tighter, as if the walls were inching closer. Margot's inner defenses rose. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I think we're talking about two different things," she said. "You're talking about obligation. I'm talking about autonomy." Whoopi nodded slowly. "And I'm saying autonomy doesn't erase impact." For a moment, Margot said nothing. Her gaze dropped to the table, then lifted again. "When I was starting out," she said quietly, "I was told to be grateful, to not ask questions, to just accept what was given. I fought for control over my career because I didn't want to be owned." The audience leaned in. This was different now, less debate, more confession. "I won't trade that control," Margot continued, her voice gaining strength, "for a checklist of what people think I should say or do." Whoopi listened, her expression unreadable. "I respect that," she said, "but understand why people still ask." Margot's eyes flickered. "I do understand," she said. "I just don't agree that silence is always guilt." That word again. Silence. It hovered between them like an accusation that refused to fade. A co-host tried to ease the moment, offering a lighter question about Margot's latest film. Margot answered, professional, charming, but the edge remained. Every laugh felt measured. Every smile felt earned. Whoopi waited. She always did. And when the conversation circled back, inevitably, she spoke again. "You're one of the most powerful women in this industry," she said. "Power makes people uncomfortable, including the people who hold it." Margot met her gaze. "Power also makes people project," she replied. The audience reacted instantly, half applause, half sharp inhales. Social media would later replay this line endlessly, dissecting it frame by frame. Whoopi smiled then, just a little. "Fair," she said. "But projection doesn't come from nowhere." Margot laughed softly, more breath than sound. "Neither does expectation," she said. The room buzzed. Producers exchanged looks off camera. This was not the segment they had planned, but it was the one everyone would remember. Margot spoke again, more openly now. "I care deeply about how stories affect people. I wouldn't be here if I didn't. But I'm tired of the idea that if you don't perform concern in the right way, you don't have any." Whoopi's voice softened, but the words didn't. "Performance is part of this business," she said. "You know that better than anyone." Margot's jaw tightened. "That's exactly why I resist it." The audience erupted, applause louder, more unified this time. Even those who disagreed seemed impressed by her refusal to fold. Whoopi sat back, studying her. "You're not wrong," she said slowly. "But resistance comes with consequences." Margot nodded. "So does compliance." For a brief moment, there was something like mutual respect hanging in the air. Not agreement, but recognition. Two women who had fought different battles, standing on the same stage, unwilling to surrender their ground. The co-host announced they were running out of time. The audience groaned softly, disappointed, hungry for resolution that wasn't coming. Margot smiled politely, thanked them for the conversation. Whoopi nodded, her expression calm but intense. As the cameras pulled back, applause filled the studio again, louder now, layered with adrenaline. Margot stood, waved, and walked off stage, her posture composed, her mind anything but. Backstage, assistants whispered. Phones buzzed. Clips were already circulating. Margot caught a glimpse of a screen, her own face frozen mid-sentence, headlines forming beneath it. Out in the studio, the hosts exchanged looks. Whoopi adjusted her glasses, unbothered. She had said what she meant. Whether people liked it or not was never the point. And somewhere between the cheers and the critiques, the audience realized they hadn't just watched a celebrity interview. They'd witnessed a fault line, one that would keep cracking long after the lights went down. The hours after the show felt heavier than the moment itself. That was the strange thing. Inside the studio, tension had been loud, visible, almost theatrical. Outside, it became quiet and relentless, like pressure building under the surface. Margot Robbie sat in the back of her car as it pulled away from the studio, the city sliding past the tinted windows, her reflection staring back at her from the glass. Her phone buzzed once. Then again. And again. She didn't need to look to know what it was. Clips. Quotes. Opinions. She closed her eyes for a brief second, replaying the exchange in her mind. Whoopi's voice. The word impact. The pause before her own answers. She'd walked into the studio prepared to promote a film. She'd walked out carrying something much heavier, an invisible weight that settled on her shoulders without asking permission. Meanwhile, back inside the View studio, the energy hadn't dissipated either. During the next segment, the co-hosts tried to laugh, tried to pivot, but the audience remained restless. You could feel it in the delayed applause, in the way people leaned toward one another during breaks, whispering. They knew they'd seen something raw, something unscripted, and it had changed the temperature of the room. Whoopi Goldberg sat calmly, flipping through her notes as if nothing unusual had happened. But those who knew her well noticed the stillness in her posture, the way her jaw set just slightly tighter than usual. She wasn't angry. She wasn't defensive. She was resolved. When the show wrapped, producers approached carefully, voices low. That was intense, one said, choosing the word like a test. Whoopi looked up, unimpressed. It was honest, she replied. That's the job. Across town, Margot stepped into her hotel room, heels finally off, shoulders sagging as the door closed behind her. The silence was immediate and deafening. She dropped her bag on the chair and sat on the edge of the bed, phone now face up beside her. The screen lit up again. She glanced at it this time. Trending. Her name sat there, paired with Whoopi's, wrapped in phrases like unexpected clash, tense exchange, audience stunned. She scrolled slowly, absorbing fragments of opinions that felt like they were being hurled from every direction. She handled it with grace. She dodged the real question. Whoopi said what needed to be said. Why are actresses expected to fix the world? Margot exhaled, a sound caught somewhere between a laugh and a sigh. Of course, she murmured to herself. She thought about the moment Whoopi leaned forward, the intensity in her eyes. There had been no malice there, just insistence. That was what unsettled her most. This hadn't been an ambush for ratings. It had been a challenge. On another screen, somewhere else entirely, Whoopi's words were being dissected with equal ferocity. Supporters praised her courage, her refusal to let celebrity polish override accountability. Critics accused her of cornering a guest, of turning a talk show into a courtroom. Whoopi watched none of it. She never did. She'd lived long enough to know that the loudest voices faded fastest. What mattered was the conversation that lingered after the noise died down. The next morning, headlines grew sharper. Morning shows replayed the clip on loop. Commentators paused the footage, analyzing Margot's body language, Whoopi's tone, the audience's reaction. A panel of experts debated what responsibility really meant in modern Hollywood. Margot sat through a makeup session for another appearance, staring at her reflection while someone powdered away the evidence of a sleepless night. You okay? Her publicist asked gently. Margot nodded. I'm fine, she said automatically. Then, after a pause, I think. She answered questions that day with care, choosing neutrality where passion threatened to spill over. But each time she spoke, she felt the shadow of the View hovering behind her words. Every sentence felt like it might be read as a response, even when it wasn't. In quiet moments, she questioned herself. Did I push back too hard? Did I not push back enough? She'd built her career on intention, on thoughtful choices. Yet now, intention seemed irrelevant compared to interpretation. Whoopi, meanwhile, returned to the table the next day as she always did. Same chair, same mug, same calm authority. When the topic inevitably came up, she addressed it once, and only once. We had a conversation, she said plainly. That's it. No apology. No clarification. No retreat. The audience applauded, some louder than others. Behind the scenes, however, the ripple effect continued. Industry insiders whispered about that moment. Studios quietly wondered whether stars would become more cautious or more confrontational. Young actors debated in private group chats whether visibility was a privilege or a trap. Margot read a long message from a fellow actress late one night. I watched the whole thing. It scared me, but it also made me feel seen. She stared at the words for a long time. The truth, she realized, was that both things could exist at once. Fear and validation. Autonomy and impact. She hadn't lost control in that studio, but she hadn't held all of it either. And maybe no one ever truly did. Days later, a journalist asked her directly, "Do you regret how that interview unfolded?" Margot paused. Cameras zoomed in, waiting. She felt the familiar pressure again, the expectation to smooth, to simplify. She chose neither. "No," she said slowly, "but I'm still thinking about it." The answer rippled outward, sparking another round of analysis. But beneath it all, something quieter was happening. Conversations behind closed doors. Text messages between colleagues. Reflections that didn't make headlines. Whoopi noticed it too, in the emails she received, in the way strangers stopped her to say thank you. Not for being right, but for being direct. One evening, long after the storm had begun to settle, Margot sat alone with a script spread across her table. She read the same page 3 times without turning it. The characters felt different now. Heavier. More real. She thought of Whoopi's voice again. Autonomy doesn't erase impact. Margot closed the script, not in frustration, but in acknowledgement. The conversation hadn't ended when the cameras cut. It had just changed form. And somewhere between 2 women who refused to back down, a larger truth had been exposed. Uncomfortable, unresolved, and impossible to ignore. By the time the week ended, the moment had taken on a life of its own. It no longer belonged to the studio, or even to Margot Robbie and Whoopi Goldberg. It belonged to the audience, to the comment sections that never slept, to the clipped videos stripped of context and replayed like evidence in a never-ending trial. Inside the View studio, staff members still talked about it in lowered voices. Audience members who had been there told friends the same thing. You could feel it. Not shock, not hostility. Something heavier, like watching 2 truths collide without either one shattering. Some people admitted they'd felt uncomfortable. Others said they'd felt energized. A few confessed they'd felt seen for the first time watching daytime television. Whoopi walked back onto the set days later to a longer applause than usual. Not louder, longer. Sustained. Intentional. She acknowledged it with a nod, nothing more. She didn't claim victory. She didn't frame the moment as a triumph. To her, the aftermath wasn't about headlines. It was about the fact that people were still talking, still arguing, still thinking. Margot, across the ocean on another press stop, felt the echo in subtler ways. Interviewers leaned forward just a bit more. Questions circled responsibility, even when they weren't supposed to. Fans approached her with conflicted admiration, thanking her for standing her ground, or quietly admitting they hadn't agreed with her, but respected her honesty. Late one night, scrolling through messages she'd avoided for days, Margot came across a video filmed from the studio audience. Not the polished broadcast clip. Not the viral soundbite. A shaky phone recording capturing the silence between words, the collective breath held by hundreds of people at once. She watched it all the way through. In that grainy footage, she didn't see a confrontation anymore. She saw 2 generations, 2 philosophies, 2 kinds of courage refusing to be minimized. She saw herself listening as much as speaking. And she understood something she hadn't in the moment. The discomfort wasn't a mistake. It was the point. Media outlets tried to declare winners. They always did. Some crowned Whoopi as fearless and unyielding. Others praised Margot for refusing to be boxed in. But the more thoughtful voices pushed back against that framing. This wasn't a battle. It was a reckoning, messy, unresolved, and necessary. Weeks later, a poll asked viewers how they felt watching the exchange. The results were split almost evenly. Uncomfortable but important. Too intense for daytime TV. The most honest conversation I've seen in years. That split told the real story. Hollywood didn't change overnight. It never does. But something shifted. Panels referenced the moment. Actors spoke more openly about the pressure of visibility. Hosts reconsidered how far questions should go, and how far they must. Margot eventually addressed it one last time, not in an interview, but quietly at a film event. "I don't think conversations are supposed to end neatly," she said. "If they do, maybe they didn't go deep enough." Whoopi heard about the quote later. She smiled to herself. That, more than any apology or agreement, felt like understanding. And for the audience, the ones in that room, and the millions watching from couches and phones, the moment became a reference point. A reminder that real tension doesn't always explode. Sometimes it lingers. Sometimes it follows you home. Sometimes it makes you question where you stand long after the screen goes dark. That's what made it unforgettable. Not the raised voices, not the applause, but the silence in between. Now we want to hear from you. Did Whoopi Goldberg ask the hard questions no one else would? Did Margot Robbie defend her autonomy with strength and grace? Or did this moment expose a deeper divide in how we expect celebrities to carry the weight of the world? Share your thoughts in the comments, start the conversation, and don't forget to subscribe to Stage View for more explosive, emotional, and cinematic stories that take you right inside the moments everyone's still talking about.